We are live.
Great. All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody out there in the interweb world and folks on our call. My name is Maggie Ullman and I am your new city council person. And I also get the privilege of serving you all as the chair of this new Environment and Public and Safety Committee. Glad that you're here on our January 24th, 2023 meeting. All of us on City Council and staff are participating virtually, and to help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud so we can follow together. And we are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. For those of you out there with us today, glad you're here. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment, please use the same number, which is 855-925-2801 with the meeting code 9471. Your phone will be muted and you'll hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. So after those remarks, I'll kind of get us started with a roll call. Introduce ourselves. If folks want to come off mute and just give a hey, that would be fantastic. So I'll call your name and then just go ahead and say hey. So welcome, Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore.
Hello.
Our other council person, Shanika Smith, isn't joining us today. She can't make it, but she's one of our teammates in this group. And then how about City Manager Deborah Campbell?
Good morning.
Good morning. Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
Good morning. City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning, everyone.
Glad you're here. Police Chief David Zach. Glad you're here.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Fire Chief Scott Burnett. I don't know if you heard me, Chief, but I see your icon, so I think
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Sure can. And then Division Fire Chief Jeremy Knighton's here also. I don't see. Oh, there you are. Hey.
Good morning.
Also, our Sustainability Director Bridget Herring's joined us.
Good morning, everyone.
Glad you're here. And then James, I don't know that we've met before, but James Toberlin from the WNC Wildlife, or maybe we have once to see your face, but glad you're here also.
Morning, everybody.
Great background. I want to be there. Well, that gets us kicked off. We're going to go ahead and jump in. We have a lot to cover today, which is very exciting. A lot of really cool progress of things moving forward. And as has been the practice of the Public Safety Committee, we start with public comment. We'll do that today and see how that method goes going forward. So staff, can you help guide us through if there's any public comment to start us off today?
No, there is not.
All righty. Today's agenda does include public comment both in the beginning and the end. Again, we'll see if that's a method we stick with in the future. So if you're listening and have something to share today, there is that opportunity at the end to comment. So the first item is the approval of the September 27 minutes. I did have a process question. Given that I wasn't a member of the committee at that time, part of me is like, I'm not sure if I should approve those minutes. Is that, tell me what the process approach is for that.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. That is an excellent question. And the answer is yes. Council, as well as its subcommittees, are considered ongoing legal entities, which means even though the membership may change, the entity of the committee is itself, meaning that those on the committee now, even if they are not part of the committee when the minutes were established, they're still not only able, but actually required by law to vote as the current sitting members.
Great. So is there, and then also just for the folks listening along, we had mentioned earlier, since Sandra and myself are the council representatives today and Shanika wasn't able to join us, that we still are taking votes and that we still are taking votes. And then depending on what those votes turn out, there's different paths that they go from there. So is there a motion to approve the minutes from the 27th of September?
This is Sandra, and I'd like to approve the minutes from September 27th.
I second.
You are able to second, Madam Chair.
Okay. And then process-wise, I would open for comment or discussion between Sandra and myself.
Notice.
Do not have to do that for the minutes because that's a procedural vote, but you will do that on future votes if you choose.
Thanks. Y'all are being so kind with my first run training wheels. I swear by the second run, we'll be riding our bike without it. No comments from me either. So all those in favor, do I have to roll call vote? Roll call vote.
You are required on all virtual meetings to do roll call votes.
Great. Sandra, Vice Mayor Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilmember Ullman, aye. There you go. Okay, cool. There we go. So the next step is I'm very excited about this, that we're going to talk about the purpose of this committee. What I love that staff has been doing with our committees is really helping us kind of set out charters, goals, kind of some direction so that we can have some consistent thread helping us. And you all have been doing that really nicely in the past with other committees, and I'm excited for us to start that today. So I guess I'll turn it over to Deborah to share with us about the purpose of the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Ullman, and congratulations on your chairmanship. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of time just to give you a very quick and brief overview of this reconstituted committee. And again, I am Deborah Campbell, and I serve as your city manager. Next slide, please. So, you know, our history with presentations is we like to begin with the end in mind and hit on some of the key takeaways. As we noted, the Environment and Safety Committee is a newly formed committee that was that replaces the former Public Safety Committee. And the scope of this committee has been expanded not only to include items related to public safety, but also public health and climate resilience related topics, which means that the agenda that you see before you shows the diversity of the kinds of topics that will be discussed in this committee. And I'll get to those later in the presentation. This committee is comprised of 3 members, and I think you've heard those committee members' names, and we will be meeting on the 4th Tuesday of the month at 11 o'clock. And staff will be working with this committee over the next couple of months to develop a work plan. And I'll be providing a little bit of information on what's on your agenda for the next couple of months. Next slide. And so again, the membership of the Environment and Safety Committee will be your chair, Ms. Ullman, the Vice Mayor, Sandra Kilgore, and Councilmember Shanika Smith. Staff support in terms of a liaison for the committee will be myself as the major liaison. And then there will be other staff support by department directors, Chief Scott Burnett with the Fire Department, Chief David Zach with Asheville Police Department, Bridget Herring with our Sustainability Department, and D. Tyrell McGirt with Park and Recreation Department. So this array of staff will be supporting this committee, and again, reflecting the broad array of topics that will be coming to this committee. And again, the meeting scheduled 4th Tuesday of the month at 11 o'clock. Next slide, please. And so the scope, I'm not going to read through all of this, but essentially, your role will be to review policy updates and make policy recommendations that ensure that we address issues related to the environment, to public health, to building and maintenance resilience related to climate change, and obviously the provision of public safety, and including police, fire, emergency management services, intergovernmental relations, and cooperation with law enforcement. And that potentially will be other law enforcement entities like the Sheriff's Department or other organizations within our community and our region. Next slide, please. And so this is a better way to really explain the scope of the topics, again, that will be coming to environment and safety. Items like green building, facility upgrades and retrofits, water use and sanitation, food system security, parks and recreation operations and planning, climate justice, emergency preparedness, and obviously public safety. Again, the scope and breadth of, and these are just examples, these are not the only topics that will be coming to this committee. But again, the scope being very, very broad in terms of environment and safety related issues. And we're looking at this holistically, not only from the natural resources perspective, but also from the human perspective, particularly around things like food system security. Next slide, please. And so to date, we have mapped out what you will be considering for both February and March. And you can see Municipal Climate Action Plan, possibly an update, also an update on single-use plastic reduction initiative, and the Justice Resource Action Council for Community Safety Initiatives update. And that's a lot around violence interruption. And then in March, we'll be doing food scraps drop-off, the EPIC recruitment update, and that's a recruitment effort for the Asheville Police Department that is heavily related to a social media recruitment initiative. We'll be given an update on crime data and then an initiative for our community responder program to help us with responses to the unsheltered and unhoused and additional crime-related issues. Next slide. And to look at kind of the strategic plan priorities and alignment, for this fiscal year, the primary priority alignment is reimagining public safety and neighborhood resilience. And then other strategic priority alignment would be improve and expand core services. Next slide. And so those are the key takeaways. We deeply, deeply appreciate your service, your interest. And again, I think this is going to be a very, very busy committee. And there are lots of topics that you will be reviewing and making recommendations and considering for public policy that will be forwarded to council for final action. So with that, I will see if there are any questions about any of the items that I've identified or any other discussion around the role and scope of your work.
I don't have any questions, just thanks. I know a lot of the structure of this was thought through from the council before I joined. So Vice Mayor Kilgore, like great vision. I think merging environment and public safety is really wise from the water shortage we saw or the water outage that we just experienced. That's a perfect example of how public safety is about clean drinking water. It's about responding to floods. It's also about policing and keeping our community protected. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I also want to just give you all accolades that as someone who spent my career is in the environmental space, this is a really big moment that we have brought concerns around the environment into the level of our discernment around at a council committee. So I'm really hopeful and excited and ready to do all this good work together.
Great. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I will turn it back over to you, Chairman Altman.
Fantastic. And on that thread that I was just mentioning, emergency preparedness and where we're looking to keep our community safe, the next item is to address number 4 on the agenda, emergency preparedness plan. We have Chief Burnett to talk through with us the emergency operation plan and continuity of operation plan. And for the public, those are a lot of words, but essentially, I'm sure he'll share that this is when something goes on, how are we going to click into gear right away? And it's really fantastic timing that y'all have already had this in the works so we can really tune all this up to be even better as we go forward. So I'll turn it over to you, Chief, or actually to Division Chief, whoever's going to kick us off.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy Knighton. I serve as the Division Chief of Emergency Management for the Asheville Fire Department. Good morning to you, Vice Mayor Kilgore and Chairperson and Councilmember Earlman. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak today. I have a really important project that we're beginning, and look forward to telling you more about it as we move forward. Next slide, please. As Ms. Campbell said, beginning with the end in mind, some key takeaways we're going to talk about and discuss are we're going to highlight and give a brief overview of what the Emergency Operations Plan and the Continuity of Operations Plan are and how they reflect the current organization and the initiatives that we're both going to support and anchor, such as the Climate Justice Initiative and the Water Resources Emergency Management Plan, as well as other emergency operations plans that we currently have within other departments. We embarked on this project in July, and since then, kind of where we are and what's gone on since then, we're going to walk through that very specifically, but we're going to talk about the proposals and how competitive this process was, and also the evaluation team and how diverse they were, but also how much work went into putting this together and looking through these proposals, and then obviously the selection process and who was selected as that, as that's going to be helping us and joining our team to guide us through those next steps. And then we're going to talk on next steps, project kickoff, what the planning process looks like, and then the continuous stakeholder and community engagement that's about to take place as we move forward. So, next slide, please. So as a project overview, the Emergency Operations Plan and the Continuity of Operations Plan do parallel. However, they are definitely specific and focus on different components of when something happens. The Emergency Operations Plan gives us that framework. It also allows us to prepare, respond to, and recover from a disaster or incident or event. This allows us to, again, create that rhythm, create that process and what that response looks like, and brings in that systematic management of expectations, both from our community and from staffs that will be responding. The COOP plan identifies how the city will continue to provide those core services and essential functions during an emergency. It's very important that these both work together and are complement each other. And many times, as we're seeing, as the changes that we're experiencing, not only in the environment, but other the disasters that we're facing, the events that we're facing as a community, those two need to be in parallel, and we need to be prepared to engage those. The third component of this is the community engagement. We're going to leverage the existing relationships and groups that we have within our community. We're going to make sure and ensure that we're using an equity lens to include everyone, those most marginalized, and also at the same time promoting that preparedness, the personal preparedness and resilience through our neighborhoods and ultimately down to the individual. Next slide, please. So when we had started on this process, again, it began in July. We wrote the scope of work, and there was a team of us behind the scenes that wrote the scope of work, kind of what we wanted, where we had been, and it really reflected what we were asking someone to help us with. And then we began to put together a team. Once the scope of work was completed, we began to put together a team that would ultimately review every one of these proposals, and working with our folks in finance and purchasing, get this out, cast our net as broad as we could to get the most involvement and the most interaction in this space amongst all the companies and folks that operate there. Once we did this, we realized very early on that this was going to be quite the task. And then in this evaluation, we saw and we included folks from fire, information technology, equity inclusion, our finance and management service, and then also we wanted to make sure that not only our horizontal stakeholders, as far as internal to the city, were included, but also kind of that vertical relationship that we have with the county. And so we included our county's emergency management division manager and the Buncombe County Security and Readiness Officer. And this was the evaluation team. There was a lot of work put in by these individuals. Next slide, please. We looked at 13 different proposals. Well, actually 15 different proposals were submitted. We found that 13 of them to be responsive after the initial review, and all were within budget. The evaluation was a pretty intense evaluation. We knew that we were looking for not only a teammate, a partner, but we were going to look for someone to really dig deep, and we wanted that external view and of such an internal process, and we wanted to really make ourselves really put it all out there. So the evaluation categories consisted of approach, access, and availability, qualifications demonstrated by the vendor, also demonstrated experience, community and stakeholder engagement, what this planning process looked like, as well as the deliverables that we were going to expect at the end. We broke that down further into 37 different managed and measured components. At the end of this evaluation, each evaluation consisted of about 25 to 45 pages. All of the folks on the evaluation team read every word and then broke those down and ultimately scored those. At the end, we interviewed the top 3 candidates, and Percy's Consulting was unanimously selected by the evaluation team. Next slide, please. So kind of next steps and what that looks like. Again, we're doing the kickoff meeting, and we're going to have representation from each of the city departments to begin this kickoff. And as we begin this kickoff, this is kind of what the next steps look like. And this is a rough timeline, but for the next 8 months, these folks, Percy's Consulting, is going to be working with us to ultimately produce these 2 plans, as well as some exercises. A plan is really not worth the paper it's written on unless we exercise that and integrate that into our operations daily and when disaster or incident happens. So you've got the 2 plans, and you've got the exercises, and then continuing through this process over the next 8 months, which was one of the largest categories in the assessment, was that community and stakeholder engagement. What that looks like, listening. We've already had some preliminary meetings with some of our community connectors and talking about, what's worked, what tools do we already have. So that engagement is going to be very important. And we will continue that throughout this entire process, as well as coming back before this committee to do check-ins and talk about milestones and talk about those next steps as we begin to drill down on this. Next slide, please. So again, the key takeaways, obviously the 2 plans that we're working through, the emergency operations plan and the continuity of operations plan, what that process looked like, and a big thank you to all those folks that were involved in this from the very beginning. This is truly a team effort, and I look forward to working through this project, and I'm very excited about the results that this is going to, the improvements and that continuous improvement that this is going to help us bring about. So what we're asking, next slide, please. So the ask is we're requesting that the Environment and Safety Committee move this item forward to the larger council for consideration. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Division Chief. I have a couple questions. I don't know, Sandra, if you want me to get started or if you have any. Great. Okay. First of all, again, just a big thanks. I'm so grateful and proud our organization already has this in the works. It's so unfortunate that we had a climate-related weather emergency recently where we had to use our emergency management planning. And I think that we did a lot of really good things right with that water outage, and we have always the potential to learn more. And I think the fact that we already have resources dedicated to work on these plans this year just feels serendipitous and a good opportunity for us to just really be the best we can. So a couple of questions I have come from my climate lens, probably unsurprising. We know it's very much a best practice for cities who are internalizing their concerns about climate change to be integrating that with emergency management. It's something we see more and more of. So the two questions I have, one is I was kind of surprised to see that on the evaluation team, our sustainability staff weren't involved, and just curious if we thought of that or how they are tagging into this, because I think there's a lot of resource there, having a different lens. The second question I have is that I'm very familiar with plans that cities often had called climate adaptation plans. And they're different, very much so, than an emergency management plan. However, they nest well. And what we see in climate adaptation plans is that we really use excellent climate data to hyper focus what our vulnerabilities are to the changing climate. Now, we're super lucky in Asheville that we might not even need a super fancy plan because we have such awesome data scientists around here that have been helping us learn over time. The major vulnerabilities we have are things like we saw with a water outage from severe weather, flooding, landslides, massive power outages from storms and things of that nature. So that whole preamble kind of leads to, in these type of plans, in the plans that you're anticipating, how does the knowledge of what we're expecting with climate emergencies, as well as all the other emergencies, play into what we do with the plan? Like, for example, in adaptation plans, a lot of times there would be some narrowing on major likely scenarios so that instead of planning for the 50 bajillion things that could go wrong, we get really clear on the most likely ones. And I'm not sure how much of that is just a different planning process or that adds into something like this. So those are kind of the two questions of where our sustainability staff who have a lot of knowledge have been and can play in this, and then how we're using what we know about climate emergencies to make sure that we're really focusing some time on that, hopefully, in this process. That all makes sense?
Yes, it does. And I'll begin with the selection process. So when we put this together, we currently have what's called an all hazards planning committee within the city. And that's a group of representation from the different department that comes together, and we talk about our process. We talk about our hazards. We talk about the things that we're doing as emergency response. We began this in 2017, and it's kind of been, we've talked about some of the major impacts that we've had through some of the climate, the changes and the events and how they're getting stronger and bigger and larger and more time consuming. So that group came together. We began this process, and we had, it began in 2019. Really, we had a class and we did an exercise, and that exercise informed of a lot of the things that we do today. And there was representation on that from climate and sustainability. It was a great, informative, and we took that after action review, and that fed into a lot of the scope of work. It fed into the Emergency Operations Center that we will eventually open here in not too distant future in our public safety station, as well as the need for this. And that after action review said we need a plan that is where we can create that rhythm that we do every time, that measures complexity and also takes into consideration these ever-changing environmental conditions that we're experiencing. So when we put together the scope of work, really we had we wanted a smaller group to do the evaluation because it was such a heavy lift. And we knew that we had already been in conversation about all of the different plans, such as the food insecurity, the climate justice initiatives, as well as the climate resiliency assessment that we partnered with to produce that document, and which informs a lot of our operations, as it did not only during the water, but on a day-to-day basis. We have a lot of ongoing things that point to that document that really support that. But we had the committee. We wanted to keep it kind of small because it was going to be such a heavy lift, and that there was no exclude. We didn't mean to exclude. We were just trying to keep that small. But the intention moving forward is they are a part of this committee, and this committee the work that's already been happening. These initiatives will definitely inform our plans, our planning process moving forward. And we look forward to using them as a resource to provide, and kind of into your next part of your question about how we will do that. We will go through a hazard vulnerability assessment, and those hazards that we know that we're going to drill down on. A part of that scope of work was talking about the different annexes. So some of the ones we know that we're susceptible to will have their own annex, and that annex will point them out specifically, and we'll be able to exercise that as a part of the plan. When it comes to the emergency operations plan, this is going to really anchor everyone and manage those expectations, and taking into consideration all of the other plans and work that we're doing, and trying to put it in kind of one spot and put that on a rhythm where we're not just talking about it, but we're exercising it, we're updating it, and it becomes integrated into our work. So kind of to your point, the hazard vulnerability assessment that we will conduct as a part of this planning process will do just that. What are the big ones that we need to watch out for? Again, the climate resiliency assessment pointed to a lot of those, and we're continue to address those ongoing. But there, with the engagement from our community and our stakeholders, we look to really performing that assessment, and that will point us in the direction that we need to go with some of those annexes. And maybe over time, those change. And we have this process, we have this plan that's able to be updated and pivot and include as those things change. And so the last part of your question was how do we maintain that awareness? A lot of what we're doing, a lot that's going to inform these plans is going to be based around common operating picture and situational awareness. So we want to make sure that we're communicating that situational awareness continuously, and all the plan informs the process and the exercise informs our response. So it's a continuous circle. And in the middle of that circle is where the situational awareness and that common operating picture lie. And that's how we do that. We use technology. We use our most invaluable resource, our people. And then we use our community to keep that and maintain that situational awareness and provide that common operating picture so that what we're susceptible to, and our community knows what we're susceptible to and what they can expect in our response. Does that answer? Did I get most of them?
That's so fantastic. Really appreciate it. I get the big picture of this all hazards planning group has been enacted, and we've had sustainability leadership in that, and that helped kind of lift this as a recommendation. And I can understand Bridget might have been sitting there going, Maggie, why were you suggesting that? That was so much work to be on the eval. So I get the balance between having your colleagues involved at the right junctions, and that based on having that relationship and that insight already, that this granular level didn't seem like the best use of time. I totally understand. And I really appreciate how thoughtful everything I'm hearing is to have the hazard vulnerability assessment and then the following annexes for the certain ones as part of this plan. I think that'll really, really serve us well. I know that we have gotten a really good rhythm when there are snowstorms and how we're closing streets. And I know that we've gotten to a really good rhythm when we've seen flooding. So I think that we have a lot that we already are doing that's moving in the right direction. And I think I'm just really thankful and hopeful and excited to see this work, because I think it'll just give y'all even more tools and time to fortify and prepare even better. So I'm thrilled to be along for the ride. Thank you.
All I'd like to say is I'd like to thank everyone for all the hard work that they've done with this initiative. And, things happen for a reason. And I look at, by us being prepared, just imagine what we'll be able to do, moving forward. So I'm excited about that. And so if there's no other questions, I'd like to take this time to make a motion that we move forward the emergency preparedness plan to the full council for a vote.
Great. I second that. And let's do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Ullman, aye. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it, Division Chief and Chief.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Great work. Okay. Another exciting topic is our next one. Item 5 on our agenda is discussing the Blue Horizons project and the interlocal agreement that we have with Buncombe County. And I believe our Sustainability Director, Bridget, is going to open that up for us.
Good morning, members of council and members of the public that might be joining us remotely. Again, my name is Bridget Herring. I am the Sustainability Director with the city, and here today to talk about an interlocal agreement for the management and implementation of the Blue Horizons project. So if we move to the next slide, we can see some key takeaways from today. And what I wanted to remind everyone is that the Blue Horizons project is really the main implementation strategy that both the city and the county utilize to make progress towards our community-wide renewable energy goal. This is a co-funded initiative where the city and the county equally contribute to the implementation of this program and supporting a community-based organization to do this work in community. And so we've done an interlocal agreement in the past, and it's time to do it again. And this is why it's coming to council today, is because this is the process vehicle that we use to work together as one entity. So interlocal agreements are under council's purview. And so we're requesting that you all authorize that so that the city and the county can work in lockstep together to really select one vendor and make sure that we're speaking cohesively with one strategy of implementation. So we go to the next slide. I'll share a little background about how we got here. So Councilwoman Allman might remember that a number of years ago, the city, the county, and Duke Energy formally created what was known as the Energy Innovation Task Force. And it had two primary functions. One was to avoid or delay the construction of a natural gas peaker plant. So when the power plant down at Lake Julian was being transitioned from a coal-fired power plant to a natural gas, Duke Energy put out an expansion plan that the community pushed back on. And so we decided to try and work together. And we're successful at being able to delay the need for that, at least in the foreseeable future, for what Duke Energy has been filing with the Utilities Commission. And then the second one was to transition our region into a clean energy future. So to do that second kind of bigger piece, the Energy Innovation Task Force created what's now known as the Blue Horizons Project, which was the idea to have a community-wide campaign that provides education, resources, and programming for members of our community to be able to make this transition in their homes and in their businesses. And in 2018, we also, as the City Council, adopted a 100% renewable energy goal that established a goal for municipal operations for 2030, but then supports the county's larger community-wide goal for Buncombe County by 2042. So as I mentioned previously, we've done an interlocal agreement to select one vendor to implement this campaign. We did this in 2020. And we selected the Greenbelt Alliance, which is our local community-based organization. That's a nonprofit that's implemented it to date. This also transitioned the Energy Innovation Task Force from being a city-county task force, similar to a board and commission, into a community group called the Blue Horizons Project Community Council that has a number of different membership categories, but has representation from all the founding partners still. Councilwoman Allman just took over that representation as well recently at the last meeting. So if we go to the next slide. Just wanted to give you a taste of the accomplishments and some of the work that the Blue Horizons Project does. So the city and the county co-fund a program underneath this umbrella called the Energy Savers Network that offers weatherization work to people of low income. So it's something that fits for everybody in case they don't go into qualify for the traditional programs that we might see through our weatherization assistance provider or others. Offering unbiased advice to individuals that are looking to make a change in their home through these home energy chats. We also did a low-income solar program that has also received additional funding through the American Rescue Plan funding as well to install solar on low-income homes. And then this also was part of a bulk purchasing program that was available to anyone in the county and resulted in just shy of 1.5 megawatts of solar being installed on rooftops around the county, which I think is really great. So just to recap, we've done this program for 3 years. You can go to the next slide, Katie. And so it's best practice to go out and re-advertise for these kinds of services every so often. So that's where we're at. So the timeline that we're looking at is to go to City Council to authorize this interlocal agreement. Again, that's the process vehicle we utilize for the city and county to be able to work in lockstep together. Once we have that approval, we would go and issue a joint RFP, a request for proposals. So we'll work with the county to develop that scope of work. The county will take the lead on publishing that. We will work together to select the responsive bidder and negotiate the contract. And then that contract would come back to City Council for approval. And then the work would begin. So we're trying to line this up with the fiscal year as well, because that's what our current contract is under. So next slide. Just wrapping back up where we started. Again, this is the strategy we use to really reach the community and to make this work be in community and led by community. And that this is a partnership that we've done with Buncombe County. And this interlocal agreement is really that process that we utilize to be able to speak with one voice. And so we request that you recommend that council authorize this interlocal agreement so we can move forward. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Bridget. Go for it.
I just want to ask, thank you, Bridget, for sharing this great information. But I just want to sort of get an idea. Basically, how did you, as far as the budget for the projects that the city and Buncombe County worked on together, what type of budget were they working with?
So the budget has changed over time, but for the past 3 years, both the city and the county have had contracts with the Greenbelt Alliance that totaled $100,000 annually for the past 3 years.
$100,000 each. So
Right. So 100,000 from the city and 100,000 from the county.
And also, when you said that you basically had about 5 graduates from Green Opportunity, basically, what did that look like? I was just sort of get an idea.
Right. So the Greenbelt Alliance was the lead implementer of the Solarize campaign. And through that process, there was like a stakeholder group that came together, and Green Opportunities was one of those. And there was a number of objectives of serving in that program, one of which was workforce development. And so working with Green Opportunities to kind of figure out what that looked like. And so we worked with the selected vendor that was doing the actual installations, Green Opportunities and Greenbelt Alliance, to kind of figure out what program we could offer. So Green Opportunities provided some of the job site training, like through OSHA requirements and whatnot. And then the vendor that we selected had them come out on site and paid them to be part of the crew to get some on the site experience with, lifting those panels up on the roof, what can they do to install them without having the electrical licensing. So that's how that partnership came to be and kind of what the program was.
So basically, I love the program, but it needs to be expanded. So, it needs a lot more funds. And the only reason I say that is because the fact like Green Opportunity, I know that basically that's the reason I was concerned about what how they were actually working with them, because basically what would happen, they were just sort of doing a lot of the grunt work, I guess, sort of, as opposed to the learning more about the technical part of it. And I was just wondering if that maybe you could look into maybe AV Tech sort of providing some kind of training basically for these people in Green Opportunity to give them opportunity to move forward, in those particular areas.
Absolutely. And we did talk to AV Tech about that opportunity. The Solarize campaign concept is like a bulk purchasing limited time. And so in our moving to 100% renewable energy plan, the consultants looked at varying campaigns around the country and said, to do them like on a cyclical basis. So not have them available all the time, but maybe have them available like once every 3 years, right? That And so it was like a limited time opportunity. We took advantage of that. And now we're trying to figure out how to maintain something that is more longer term, which is in the neighbor to neighbor, which is what some of the American Rescue Plan funding went for, which is specific to low income homes, to make that available, and trying to figure out how can we build like a longer term pipeline with workforce development as well. But it's small. It's a small piece. Yeah.
And the reason I was asking about that is because I know that the biggest problem of dealing with the renewables and all the solar and all this type of thing, especially in marginalized communities, is just that they're not catching on. You see what I mean? It's not really connecting. And if we could more or less sort of start introducing them to jobs in these particular areas and the advancements in these programs, which they would actually be able to see benefits, and also people in the community be able to see benefits, because people getting jobs in areas that is where we're headed to now. So if they could, I would like to see that program branch out, that reach out to give more people in the marginalized communities opportunities to grow in that particular area, which would also give opportunity for us to start taking an interest, because we can't see it. I'm just saying in the neighborhoods, they just can't really see the need and the renewables and all these different things. But if they're involved directly where it's financially and economically beneficial for them, then we could see more activity.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Sandra. I do think, North Carolina, for as long as I can remember, the last 5 years has been the number 2 state, only second to California, in installing new solar panels. So we're installing more solar than every other state but California. And our industry is growing rapidly. The amount of businesses that are leading these efforts, the amount of people who are part of installation, it is such a growth market area that having access to on-ramps into that industry is just very powerful. And we need that access. I really like your thinking there on where we can use this interlocal agreement so that as we in the county have our conversations to set up the RFP, where workforce plays into that conversation, and how workforce development, that strategy is presented by the contractors, is something that I'd love to see called out as well. Another place I had a question is that, first of all, that overview is just really helpful and crisp. I know it's been kind of a long journey for us, and I'm proud of our journey. And I'm really proud that as we're looking to how we pursue sustainability in the community, we are not doing it alone. We're doing it by centering community and taking community leadership and supporting that through this type of proposal, right? Through having community partners lead. I think that's wise. And that the birth of this effort, now called Blue Horizons, is really from the policy that we adopted on council for 100% renewable energy. And I'm curious for the progress update. So I heard some outcomes, some outputs of 600 low-income homes weatherized, 1.4 megawatts of renewable, which is huge and very good. But I'm struggling to connect them to our policy goals. So can we have that information of like, what percentage are we towards our policy goal? How does this play into it? Because ultimately, these resources are the only resources we're spending as an organization towards our community goal. And I just don't really have a great sense of the resources that go to this community department. I don't have a sense of our performance so far in the existing contract. As someone who used to crunch those numbers, I know I'm saying this out loud and going, that's a really hard analysis. That's not an easy thing to just whip out. So I get that. But I wonder, in what we set up in this interlocal agreement to direct the RFP, can we incorporate something about performance towards our written stated policy so that that's part of how we evaluate? So I don't know what that would look like. I don't want to be too far in the dance floor with this, but if they're proposing 5 different programs, which of them have a bigger impact towards our policy goal? Because ultimately, there's a million things we could do in the community to support a more sustainable world. And this effort is in direct support, and these resources are in direct support to an existing policy that I want us to reach. So there's a handful of things there. It might not have been a direct question, but any just thoughts in response?
Sure, absolutely. And they do measurement and verification on the weatherization program. So we have an annual report that reports out the estimate of energy savings and carbon emissions avoided from that. So that's easy to provide for you. We're still working on evolving that with some of the other softer, more educational and outreach components, because that gets a little bit harder to measure. But what I will just mention is just a challenge with the goal that we have in producing that kind of information is there's not a baseline. And so it's hard to say how close we are to our goal because it's 100% whatever we are in 2042, right? So like how many people are going to live here? What is our, what's our energy landscape going to look like? So we can definitely provide that information as like a snapshot in time, but I would just caution you from putting too much into that because we don't have that kind of hard and fast number to compare ourselves against as we move forward.
So how are we going to track performance?
I think we can measure it on the annual basis. I just think in terms of saying we're 50% of the way there, it's hard to do that when your number's always changing. Right. So we'll always have to look back in time to say how much energy did we use and what difference are we making? Right. So it's going to be looking back and looking forward.
Yeah, I think having notations to clarify why we need to be thoughtful when we review analysis is reasonable, but I don't think that's a reason not to pursue it in decision making. It does make it hard for me to say, let's go forward with this interlocal agreement without really having performance measurement data. We have these outcomes, which are awesome, but I don't know. I think that's a really essential part and a best practice that we see in other communities who pursue 100% renewable energy goals. And I think, I think we don't have that right now in a way that informs decision making. And I don't think there's a need to radically change the approach. I think that our partnership with the county is strong. We have shared vision and leadership towards this. We have shared policy towards this. I think that working with community partners and the process that we're being asked to approve is the right way forward. I just feel like as a policymaker, some more information on performance towards our policy goal is going to be essential for us to do our job to help set our
For sure. I hear that. I'm just giving you a little bit more context when we give you that information so that we know what we're looking at.
Is there I know that with our internal goal for 80% by 2050, that the policy says we're supposed to have annual reports on our progress towards that. Are we getting one of those? And when does that come up in the cycle, both our internal and this community goal to have kind of annual reports with data performance?
So I think that's a separate agenda item we didn't prepare for today, as it has varied over the years based on the different preferences of the leadership team that's been in place. But I think we can absolutely schedule that as something.
Okay. Yeah, I think that for this partnership, we definitely want that baked into this agreement, is that there'll be annual check-ins to council on kind of performance of the partnership. Is that something we could do?
Sure.
I think that would help us help you. Cool. And for those listening at home, this is obviously near and dear to my heart. And I know that our role as policymaker, and that I think Bridget is likely one of the top sustainability leaders in our country doing this work, and I'm grateful for it. And my depth of what could sound like going in the weeds is because I love so hard. I care so hard. So thanks for being there in it with me. Any other thoughts on this one? Great. Thank you for being here. So I guess we want to have a motion to move this agenda item to the full council. Can I make a motion? I can't make a motion. Oh, I can. I make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Ullman, aye. This moves forward to the full council for consideration. Thank you. All right. we have several more exciting topics, and we'll just go straight into the next one. And I think Assistant City Manager Ben Woody will help us with this. This is just for us to discuss another interlocal agreement with the Sheriff's Department for something called FUSIS camera system. So I'll turn it to you to kind of give an overview, and then I got to do a tour of the FUSIS system. So I have a handful of things to just kind of share of things I learned, because I had a lot of questions too. But Ben, why don't you get us rolling?
Yes, thank you, Council Member Ullman and Councilmember Kilgore. My name is Ben Woody, Assistant City Manager, and I appreciate the opportunity to review the proposed interlocal agreement with the Sheriff's Office for the FUSIS system. So FUSIS, we'll start there. FUSIS is a software system that's capable of extracting live and historical security feeds from multiple sources or from multiple cameras. Those cameras in the FUSIS system, if they're networked, they could be owned and operated by the Sheriff's Department. They could be owned and operated by the city. Private businesses and individuals can install cameras and also add those to the FUSIS system. So it's a network of cameras, a security system that can grow as people add cameras to the system. And one important thing I want to note is the FUSIS system is a project of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, and they are the entity that's implementing this system. So this is kind of their initiative. They're getting off the ground. And again, they are responsible for the operation of it, the maintenance, for providing networks, feeds, speeds, and all that type of items that are necessary to operate this system. So what the interlocal agreement does is it does two things, and I'll cover those real quickly. Back in July of 2022, we received a request from the Sheriff's Office to install FUSIS-enabled cameras on a handful of city properties. So back at that time, it was Pritchard Park, the intersection of Hiawassee and Lexington, as well as City Hall. So it kind of started as a request to make for the county to install FUSIS cameras on the city properties. So one thing the interlocal agreement would do is it would provide permission for the Sheriff's Office to install the FUSIS link cameras on portions of city property. Of course, as part of that agreement, they would need to get permission from the city manager to move forward with any installation of cameras. And of course, there's a requirement for electrical permits. Typically, there could even be a building permit depending on the type of pole that's used. So again, that part of the interlocal agreement creates a framework by which they can request to have cameras installed on city properties. And again, just want to reiterate that, they are responsible for the installation and the maintenance and any costs associated with the operation of those FUSIS linked cameras. The other part, so the second part of the interlocal agreement would also provide for limited access by the Asheville Police Department to the FUSIS system. So again, that would allow APD under certain conditions. So APD would have to access FUSIS through the Sheriff's Office, and they would be subject to the Sheriff's policies in terms of use of FUSIS. But that would allow APD to have access to that system, and that would be for cameras that are located within the city limits, excluding Buncombe County schools. So if the system included cameras on city property, APD would have access to those. But if the system also included cameras that were, say, installed on private property or installed at housing authority properties, wherever it may be, this part of the interlocal agreement would also give APD access to those cameras in the city limits, excluding Buncombe County schools in the city limits. That does require a $30,000 annual payment to the Sheriff's Office to participate and have access to the FUSIS system. So that's really what we're looking at today. This is also on the consent agenda for later tonight if council moves it forward. I can answer any questions you have about the interlocal agreement. I'll do my best to answer any technical questions that may come up. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate that. I have some questions here too. I don't know, Sandra, if you wanted to kick off or you want me to dig in. Okay. So I just have a handful of things to say. This brought a lot of thoughts for me and a lot of learning for me. So I just want to kind of share some things that I learned along the way. I did a tour yesterday at like the FUSIS room where there's a bunch of this data set up, and talked with the sheriff's department in depth about their protocols and policies, et cetera. But before I get into like some of what I learned, I just want to say my initial reaction is that I think there's a lot of potential for a tool like this to improve to just continuously improve and be even better at what we're doing in our police department. I think that continuing to run a police department with such low staff compared to what we need is hard. And I want to support us in doing our best. And I think that that's been really difficult for us. And I think that a tool like this, where there could be real-time review of a camera. So after there is a break-in or a robbery, and if there is a camera in the area, when dispatch receives that 911 call, they could automatically start to look at a camera feed and say, oh my gosh, there's someone with zebra uniform running away, and tell that to the person dispatch. So that time, that 3 minutes, that 5 minutes between dispatch being called and one of our officers showing up, if we have camera to really inform us what's going on, we're starting all that much with more information for our police team to do their best job to really get to that arrest and solve that crime, solve for what happened. I think that's worth trying. I think that it's new for us. And so with anything new, we have to learn and be cautiously optimistic, but I think it's worth testing out to see if we can get that information. The other thing I think is interesting with this FUSIS system is that, again, if we have videotape of someone's face blatantly in the camera after committing a crime or during committing a crime, that then gets to be used as evidence so that we aren't relying on hearsay or scouring for witnesses. We have evidence right away. And I think that that really helps us improve the timing it takes to solve these crimes as well as pursue the justice process. So I'm interested and cautiously optimistic that we could benefit from this, but it's new, so let's be cautious as we potentially look into it. The other thing I want to say is two things, is that I see this, the goal of this is about really increasing our ability to make arrests. Again, with our staff down, I wish I could look every police officer in the eye and just say, oh my gosh, this must be so hard. I feel for you. It's a hard job right now, especially with not all the resources, that if this technology could help us, I think it's worthwhile. And I'm very clear that I don't think this is a tool that will necessarily reduce crime. We have to do that in a lot of other ways. There's a lot of big system stuff we need to do. There's programming we need to do. But we can't just think either or. This is a both and. We need to keep doing all of that and double down our efforts. And this might be something to help us. So I know that's a big preamble, but I think this is an important community conversation for us to have, because this is a new tool to consider adding to our tool lid. So then what I learned on the tour, I had some specific questions because this is a video feed. What does that mean? And so some of the questions I had was, who owns this data? So it's a live feed for about 72 hours, and then it's automatically deleted. The sheriff contracts with this company called FUSIS, and FUSIS can't access this information unless the sheriff's department says, hey, we just had an incident at this time, at this place. Can you please download the file and send it to us? So it's not like some other company is using our data against us or taking these videos and doing other things with it. It's our information, and it has an auto delete after a couple days. So it's really for the use of starting our leads with some video data. The other thing that I had questions about was the idea of facial recognition technology. So facial recognition technology is where AI is used to say, okay, we just got a video of Maggie I shouldn't use myself. We got a video of Jane Doe doing something wrong, and AI would run that video with anything like on Google or in other arrest records, and then try and match it. And then tell the police, oh, we saw this live video. We think it could be Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, Jane Doe 3. That technology is not being used. in our community with this software. Why I think that's important is that there is a lot of data tracking that there's racial bias in the AI technology at this point. Until and if that concern is completely 100% refuted, I'm not comfortable with us looking towards that. And I was happy to hear the sheriff say the same. So facial recognition software is not part of the system that we are pursuing. The last thing I'll say after the tour I took is that I just had a lot of questions because this is, like I said, new. And the Sheriff's Department is open to having a tour with members from the public. So if anyone listening is like, I want to know more, I'm concerned, like shoot me an email and I can coordinate, or shoot the sheriff an email. But I know several council folks have done tours. It's really informative to understand. Okay, now I'm getting to kind of where some of my questions are. Questions I have is that in the agreement, as you shared, Ben, it states that we would grant the sheriff permission to put a handful of cameras on city property, and it would give our police department access to using the technology, the software, essentially, to look at these video feeds when pursuing investigations. My question is, when talking with the sheriff's department, there is a handful of what they use the language of like audit controls. So who can access this, the video streams, when, why, for what purpose, what is the paper trail of who accessed it, when, why, for what purpose, etc. And I just would be curious if we could take a look at that or get some more information on that. My understanding is that by us opting into this system, that those policies would guide our participation in it. But I think what research tells me is a clear way for us to keep building trust with the community and do the best we can with technology like this, having really clear policies of how this information is getting used, when and where and why, is just a good practice for us to really do this the best way. So I'm not sure if there's any more info that we could share now on that, or if it's like we need to circle back and provide that to us as a committee to look at. So that's kind of my first question. Thank you for letting me do this preamble. But again, since this is new and I think this is a big thing for us to consider, I wanted to give it due time.
So thank you for the question, Councilwoman Ullman. I'll take a shot at answering that. So anybody from APD that accesses the FUSA system will have to have login credentials, which will be issued by the sheriff's office. So I think there would obviously be a kind of an audit trail of what login was used to view what data when. So I think that's trackable. In terms of who is able to obtain a login or the manner in which they're able to access, APD as proposed would be subject to the sheriff's access policy. So the sheriff would establish certain ranks that would be able to access the FUSA system, as well as I think there would need to be a notice provided to their FUSIS administrator in terms of reviewing previous footage. I don't have that available today, right now, but I know the sheriff has created an administrative policy that would govern access for his employees, which he would recommend would apply to the APD employees as well. And I see Deborah's raised her hand, so I'm going to pivot to her to add to that.
Well, and I would just add, Ben, and I don't know if the sheriff talked to you about this, Councilman Ullman, but there will be kind of a governance group that will oversee the operations and management and administration of the FUSIS system. And I think some of that detail will also be assessed and reviewed by this governance group as well. I don't have all of the slots, but I think that I definitely know that the chief of police will be participating on this governance group or his designee.
Thanks, that's helpful. Sandra, anything bubbling up for you on this? Okay, I think I saw a head shake now.
Oh, no. I'm good. Thanks for all the wonderful information, Maggie, that you brought in and that Ben shared. Yeah, so I definitely think it's something that we should pursue. not only for the people in the community, especially the places that we're actually sort of giving rights to actually put up cameras. Those are mostly in commercial places that are affecting the business owners who basically are having a hard time with all types of crime, and it's not even, it's getting worse. So I'm really happy to see that we've actually taken on this program now with the Sheriff's Department, and I think it's a plus for the community. So I'm looking forward to moving forward with this agreement.
Thank you. So the other thing on my mind is that this is on our consent agenda today. I guess this is just all pretty new to me, and I'm kind of torn between wanting to see if we can get access to the policy information from the sheriff on kind of those audit control issue information and that advisory oversight committee, or just kind of moving forward to council tonight or voting towards that, but also recognizing that if it is, I might want the full council to talk about it and ask for it to be taken off consent. My spidey sense is that as a new tool that I feel extremely excited about the potential of and eager to try, just want to make sure that the public conversation is that the public's moving with us on it.
I'd like to ask a question. Does anybody, when we talk about the interlocal agreement, what's the time frame you have there? And what is there an exit strategy in case it doesn't work? Because if it is something like that, a safeguard in place, then it wouldn't be anything that we would have to really, it's just like putting something in place on a trial basis to see how well it worked, that could actually end it in any specific time. So does anyone know about the time frame and safeguards that's in place?
Yeah, good question, Councilwoman Kilgore. I can answer that. The agreement is an annual agreement, so it would need to be renewed annually. So once council approves it, we would enter into that agreement, and it would exist for a year. And then within the agreement, there's termination provisions. So I guess if everybody decided they didn't want to run the course of the year, there's a process by which a termination provision by either party can be initiated with 30-day notice.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They have something like that in place. So that could sort of navigate, we could have time to sort of work through a lot of the issues as opposed to, holding up the process.
I hear that. Yeah, I think ultimately I had so many of my questions answered. I think this technology could be useful. I think the Sheriff's Department has been valuing it. I think how much value our police department sees in this or gets from it is like, I want to learn with our police department to say, like, how is this working for us as we go? So I think that year term is wise for us to just cautiously move forward and optimistically move forward. Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and make a motion? I'll make a motion to approve this to move forward to City Council. And I don't know if I would love to see it off the consent agenda so that some of the conversation we had today could be had with the full council. So just we're all moving forward with the same thoughts and information together. And I don't know if we need to change the council agenda or if I just make a motion when we get to consent. I'm fine, the latter, whatever process is best.
I can probably answer that for you, Chairman Allman. The consent agenda, having already been published, is more difficult to change. However, any council member within their purview has the ability to request a single item to be pulled off. You will then proceed with just dealing with the remaining consent agenda items, and then that item that was removed is handled separately with as much discussion as council chooses.
That's great. Okay, then I think we'll do that. Because I also remember when we talked about an item earlier, folks were saying, well, maybe some of this. So this gives us a chance to discuss and have this conversation and me to say the same things with more of the public part of it, which I think will just help us be successful. So I make a motion to approve this interlocal agreement moving forward towards City Council.
And Sandra, I'll say.
Okay, roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore. I guess, so I say aye, and then Vice Mayor, so you seconded it and then you say aye, so it is approved.
Yes.
Okay.
Aye.
And I know there's been a lot of work going into this, and that we just have a lot to learn, and look forward to hearing from the police over time, our chief, how this is working for you, where this could be beneficial, all that type of stuff. So we'll be in it with you over time to be able to make sure that this new thing moves in the direction we want it to, if it does. Okay. All right. We have two remaining items. Item 7 on our agenda is the Asheville Wildlife Feeding Ordinance, where I think Brad and James are going to help us kick this off.
Thank you, Chairman Ullman. I'm actually going to start by simply introducing James. He is joining us today by himself, I believe, but there have been multiple members of the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission that has been working with the city for several months to address this issue. I won't steal his thunder because I'm sure he can explain this better than I can. I'm going to let him give a little presentation that I believe he has submitted. So if we can go ahead and pull that up. And then at the end of this, the ask will include the recommendation by this committee to move to council a proposed change to our existing ordinance. So I will be happy to address some of those specifics once James has had his opportunity to complete the presentation. So with that, James, I will hand it to you.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Council Member Kilgore for the opportunity to talk to you today, and everyone else on the call from the city's office and the public joining in. Just a quick introduction here. As Brad mentioned, there's been several of us with the Wildlife Commission staff that have been engaging with the city on this important issue. And the lead of that is Colleen Offenbuttle, our Black Bear project leader. That's a statewide position. Justin McVeigh, who's on the call with us today, is our District 9 wildlife biologist. And District 9 covers 12 counties in the far western part of the state, and Buncombe County is included in Justin's district there. And then I'm the mountain operations supervisor, so I supervise about 34 counties here in the western part of the state. And we wear a lot of hats throughout the year, but part of our job is dealing with human wildlife interactions across the state. And a big driver in that regard for us is human bear interactions, and Buncombe County and Asheville certainly lead the way in that. And I want to take a little bit of time to kind of frame the issue here, and then, as Brad mentioned, we'll finish up with kind of our proposal or ask of the council going forward. So next slide, please. So if you live in Asheville or Buncombe County, these scenes are fairly common, and what they tend to represent are bears coming in close proximity to people. And these are scenes of what we might call unintentional feeding of bears. And so that's where bears are attracted to a residence or a business, and whether that is through unsecured trash, bird feeders, pet food that's left outside, a well-used grill that doesn't get cleaned often, whatever the attractant is, the result is the same, and that is that bears come into close proximity to people. Over time, they get habituated to that reward that they receive when they do come close to people and homes and businesses, and they get habituated to that. They lose their fear of people over time. And what we really are starting to see is kind of this generational aspect to this, where sows are bringing their cubs into these close proximate areas with homes and businesses, and teaching their young that there's a reward to be gained by coming close to these places. And so that quickly these bears begin to lose their fear of people. And it's a good thing when we're talking about wildlife that they have a fear of people, and also that people have a healthy respect for these critters and understand that in order to keep people safe and bears wild, it's very important that we do not allow them to gain that reward when they come close to our homes or businesses and lose that fear of people. All right, next slide. And so I talked about human bear interactions, and that's a metric that we track across the state. We deal with all wildlife, but we're here today talking about black bears specifically in Buncombe County and Asheville. And as you can see on this figure here, the number of HWI, which is just an acronym for human wildlife interactions. So these are the number of calls or emails, voicemails that we receive, that our staff receive across the state. And we track that, we categorize it, depending on which species it is, what the nature of the call or the report is. Is it just that I saw a bear in the yard? Is it a bear on my porch? Is it a bear trying to gain access to my home? It's a wide variety of potential reports there, but you can see that Buncombe County leads the state. This data represents the year of 2020. So you can see that Buncombe County by far leads the state in the number of human bear interaction reports that we get throughout that course of time. All right, next slide. And just another figure to try to represent that call volume that we do have. So this is a graph over the last 20 years. There on your y-axis is the number of human bear interaction reports that our staff received over that 20 years. And so the kind of reddish maroon section of that bar chart there is the other 99 counties in North Carolina. And then the blue shaded part of that bar graph represents the calls that originated from Buncombe County. And the percentages that are listed there is just out of the total number of calls across the state, what percent that represented or originated from Buncombe County. And so over that last 20 years, you can see the trend is going up. But the percentage of calls that Buncombe County accounts for, varies somewhat, but generally it's about 40% of the human bear interaction calls that we receive across the state originate from Buncombe County. Just a quick note there, in 2017, you can see that real stark increase in the call volume or the call reports there. We instituted a call center in our Raleigh headquarters office in 2017. We staffed it with 4 permanent full-time biologist positions to handle the multitude of phone calls and reports that our agency receives throughout the year. And associated with that new call center, there was a big outreach marketing campaign to really get that contact information in front of the citizens of North Carolina. And so that is really the result of that big peak that you see there. But the percentage remains the same, and the trend does as well, and that they're going up. Okay, next slide. And so, as I mentioned, the pictures that we saw earlier kind of represented scenarios of unintentional feeding. And that's something that we feel fairly confident that can be addressed in a large percentage of scenarios there through education with the residents there on what's attracting that bear close to their home, how to resolve that situation, and be bear wise. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about bear wise in a minute. But what's really concerning to us and why we approach the city officials about this issue is the increase that we're seeing in purposeful feeding of wildlife, but bears in particular. And that could be residents in the city. It could be, we've had scenarios with workers and also the visitors. So with the tourism in the Asheville area, you've got people moving to Asheville from parts of the country that they've never seen a bear or lived in bear country. And now they are. And so, it appears to be cute and cuddly to try to get a picture of someone with a bear, and food is usually the attractant used to do that. That's dangerous for people, and it's just as dangerous for the bear. So this is the issue that we really want to try to address today with this proposal to the city's ordinance. All right, next question, next slide. And so we talked about these bears becoming habituated to people and food conditioned to these rewards, coming in close proximity to people's homes and businesses. And what we've seen over the last 20 months, going back to March 2021, is an escalation in concerning bear reports. And when I say concerning, if we look at our little table there, that's kind of what we're talking about, these kind of reports where a bear has attempted to enter a home, reports of bears actually gaining entry into a home when people are inside the residence, or gaining entry into a home when people are not there, but they come home and see that a bear has been in the home. Threatening behavior. And so an example of threatening behavior when we're talking about black bears would be people out for a walk in the neighborhood and a bear's following them, or people are in their yard doing whatever they're doing and a bear's approaching them. So those are some examples of threatening behavior that when we receive a report like that, it really raises a flag to us that that bear's not behaving as it should around people. Again, that healthy fear of people that wildlife should have, where they see people and typically would turn and go the other direction. They do not want to come into close proximity to people. And in the large majority of situations, food is the issue there that has led to that lack of fear of people. And very concerning, we have received a lot of reports of people intentionally feeding bears. Now that number 57 there doesn't necessarily represent 57 different situations or locations or people intentionally feeding. We do get multiple reports on the same situation, but that number is very concerning to us, and ultimately the behavior that it leads to with these bears. Trying to gain access to homes, getting into homes while people are there, those are red flags for us, and is really what elevates this issue to the public safety concern that it is. Okay, next slide. And since 2009, bears have made physical contact with humans 8 times in Buncombe County. If we kind of paint the broader reference to that, what does that mean across the state, at least where bears are across the rest of North Carolina? The bears have made contact with humans 7 times since 2007 across the rest of the state. So as we can see, all of the factors in play here in Buncombe County, in particular in Asheville, are setting the table for the more frequent situations where bears actually make physical contact with people. And we've highlighted a few of those recently here in 2018 in Swannanoa, 2021 down in Hendersonville, and then recently there's the Folk Arts Center attack in 2021. And I'll make a point to say that all 3 of these scenarios did involve pets. And so, when we talk about people being bear wise and educating people on how to live responsibly in bear country, we talk a lot about attractants and, unsecured garbage, bird feeders, pet food outside, those kinds of things. But, we do see that unleashed dogs in particular do tend to be a common thread in scenarios where bears make physical contact with people. So keeping your pets leashed is a major tenet of the Bear Wise program. Okay, next slide. And there's an old adage that a fed bear is a dead bear, and that is certainly true. It can result directly. So we've had a couple of scenarios this year. That's a picture of Justin McVeigh there on the left. We had several scenarios this year where bears, again, coming in close proximity to homes, looking for a free meal, They've obviously gained that reward in the past, and so it becomes a part of their natural search pattern in these developed areas of Asheville. And their picture there on the left, where you can see a large, probably a plastic food dispenser with the lid. The bear was able to get its head through the opening in that lid, and it was affixed around the head of the bear, and it was not coming off there unless Justin was able to get out there, get his hands on it, and anesthetize the bear and remove that lid. Another scenario there in the middle where we had a cub got his head stuck in a big Cheeto puff container, and once it gets that opening gets around their ears and then down onto their neck, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for them to remove that container from their head. And if Justin wasn't able to respond and resolve that situation, that cub would have died at some point. So there is a direct harm and concern for the welfare of these bears when they're able to get access to trash. But bears being fed, whether unintentionally or intentionally, bears getting fed by people, human provided foods, they lose that they lose that healthy fear of people. We get into situations where their behavior escalates, and in certain scenarios and drastic, situations where public safety is the overwhelming concern, we have had to go out, trap some individual bears and euthanize them. Just as that process plays itself out, it does end up leading to a dead bear at the end. All right, next slide. Another call, another type of report that we do receive over the course of the year are vehicle strikes for a number of wildlife, but we're looking specifically at bears here. So these are the reported vehicle bear mortalities across the state, and this is the year of 2020. And you can see that Buncombe County leads the way there. So with the increased development in Buncombe County and Asheville, more people moving to the area, more road construction and development, and the bear population is doing quite well. It continues to grow at about a 5% annual rate. Just the way Asheville lays in the broader landscape there, surrounded by a lot of national forest. You've got the Asheville watershed. It's just kind of a perfect storm for a lot of people and a lot of bears to live in close proximity to one another. And so we do have a lot of vehicle mortalities in bears in Buncombe County. And this is one year, 2020, like I said, but this is, consistent year after year that Buncombe County leads the state in vehicle bear mortalities. And so that's another cause for concern as we talk about this feeding situation, because more bears are going to be living in close proximity to I-26, to I-40, those major roadways in and around Buncombe County and Asheville, as they're searching for food in those developed areas. And so that puts them more in harm's way of those potential mortality sources. Okay, next slide. And so how do we go about managing human-bear interactions? And kind of as I alluded to earlier, in 95% of these scenarios, these reports, these instances that we try to deal with, education is just paramount. And securing attractants goes a long way into solving these potential conflicts that we're seeing an escalation in. But in order to manage these interactions, we have to manage people. And so it really falls on the residents, the business owners, the community, city officials, county officials, state officials to help educate people and really to change our behavior. There's some easy things that people can do, keeping their trash secured, not having bird feeders out when bears are very active, not feeding pets outside, keeping your pets on a leash. There's these bear-wise basics that can really go a long way to keeping people safe and keeping bears wild. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to give you just a little couple minutes here about what the Wildlife Resource Commission staff does in these scenarios and situations, what our field staff are on the ground doing. So we get a call into our call center, you know, depending on the situation, they kind of triage all those calls and then send out to our district biologist and our wildlife enforcement officers or our county game wardens to handle a situation, follow up on a report if need be. And so a lot of times you'll see Justin there on site with landowners or members of a community talking about, you know, educating on bear biology, what the rules and laws are of the state governing black bear management, and talking to residents about the steps that they can take to alleviate concerns, solve any issues, removing attractants, how to go about doing that and living responsibly in bear country. When it's a situation about purposeful feeding of bears, that's usually involving our district biologist Justin there and one of our game wardens to go along and make a site visit, try to educate the person on the dangers of feeding bears, you know, the danger to themselves, but also, and importantly, the danger it presents to the bears over the long term. And really all we have at our disposal there is educating them, and then the powers of persuasion to try to get them to stop purposefully feeding bears. And that has proven to be inadequate up to this point. Okay, next slide. The other thing that we're doing is our Bear Wise campaign. The Wildlife Commission came on board with this program. Our black bear biologist Colleen Offenbodel was pretty instrumental in this campaign. It's a national campaign. It's a comprehensive and science-based approach to provide information and resources to people to live responsibly in bear country. And it revolves around 6 basics or 6 tenets, and that's pretty much securing attractants, keeping pets on leashes, and communicating with your neighbors when you see bears, or how to report bear activity, understanding bear behavior so you know when a bear is just doing its day-to-day thing or if it's actually exhibiting some kind of threatening behavior. It's consistent messaging, it's science-based, and so we're really committed to getting the word out and using that as our educational tool. And I can give a shout out to Ashley Hobbs, who works for Colleen. She lives there in Asheville and has really been leading the charge with our Bear Wise outreach program. We have 4 recognized Bear Wise communities or neighborhoods there in Asheville. We have she's got a Bear Wise business, the Sierra Nevada Brewery down in Mills River on board. And then one college has recently become Bear Wise recognized. And so that's a commitment by those communities, business, college. That's a commitment by them to adhere to those Bear Wise basics and set up a process on how to alert their residents or patrons on concerning bear behavior or, you know, their bear in the area and how to go about reporting that to the Wildlife Commission. So a big shout out to Ashley for all her efforts there. We've really got some good momentum going there and looking forward to building on that. And that's part of our time today together. Okay, next slide. Also working with Asheville Sanitation on the bear resistant cart pilot program, and want to give a big props to Jess Foster there at the Solid Waste Sanitation Department for her efforts with that. And we know there's, I think the last word I heard, there was roughly 700 carts deployed, and the waiting list continues to grow. Unfortunately, the price of those carts continues to go up. Just we all know the market we're living in these days, and so that the economics of that program continue to be a hurdle, but we look forward to continue to work through those hurdles and overcome those challenges, so that if a resident wants a bear-resistant cart, then they can get access to that. We also work with the Western North Carolina Nature Center there to test out bear-resistant products, so that securing trash doesn't mean you have to have a bear-resistant cart. There are retrofits and other tools that can work with the city's collection system to keep that trash and recycling secure. And so we work with them to test out those products that come up on the market and end up on the shelves in hardware stores to see if they actually do work and are effective. And so we appreciate that partnership with them. And then our last resort, like I mentioned earlier, is actually going out and capturing bears that exhibit a public safety concern. The Wildlife Resources Commission does not relocate bears. For a variety of reasons, but primarily we don't have anywhere that we can really take them in North Carolina where they don't end up back where people are. They have a strong homing instinct, and we know that they're going to end up back where they were eventually. And if you move a bear that's causing an issue, is habituated and food conditioned, then you just move the problem to someone else's backyard. And so that's not a long-term solution to the issue at hand. And to say that it is, a dangerous proposition for the bears and for our staff to go out and try to trap and put hands on these animals. Okay, next slide. So when we approached the city staff a few months ago, as Brad indicated, we kind of had 3 bullets of what we wanted to recommend and try to partner with the city on. The first one of those was our Bear-Wise outreach, trying to pull the city's public information office into that effort and help us to promote that consistent Bear-Wise message, and also promote our NC Wildlife Helpline. That's our call center that I referenced earlier for residents to contact, kind of be the go-to to contact for issues or concerns they have about black bears around the house. And so we've been able to connect our public information officers with the commission and the city of Asheville. And so we're on down the road with that effort, and we appreciate that cooperation. We continue to try to find ways to expand the bear-resistant cart program there in the city. And the reason for our time together today, to strengthen and clarify the city's wildlife feeding ordinance. Once we got a chance to take a look at that language, we could see there was some opportunities for improvement to really dial in that language to deal with certain situations that we like, those purposeful feeding situations that are very concerning. They're dangerous for people and they're dangerous for bears. And so next slide there. So we've got a couple of slides here just with the current language there, and then the proposed language. And Brad, I'll maybe bring you in here. I'm happy to go through this, or maybe it's more appropriate that you do.
I'm happy to do that, James. So if you want to mute your feed, that'll make sure we lose that echo. There you go. All right. Well, thank you, James, for that. I think I can pretty succinctly go over the proposed changes. The good news for Asheville is we already had a wildlife feeding ordinances on our books, so we do not have to simply start from scratch. But the changes we are making have been those that have been proposed by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission with the assistance of the city attorney's office to be able to lace them into the existing language to strengthen and update our ordinance where we felt it would be most efficient. So I'll quickly go over those areas with you, but let me say from the outset, the primary changes we are making are these. Number one, we are reducing the time required to correct violations. We are adding an additional definitions that include attracting animals and wildlife, specifically bears, as one of the prohibited activities. We are further refining the definitions of those activities And we are also increasing the scope of those members of city staff who can address the issue in order to add efficiency. So quickly, I think I can go through these as very briefly as possible and say that in section 3.7, which is up there, you will see that we have essentially made a change or a suggested change where we are reducing the time period for correcting a violation from 60 days down to 14. And I think we can move on now to the next section, which is actually 3.9, where we're making a couple of changes. We are adding the language, quote unquote, attracting to those prohibited activities. We are already prohibiting the keeping, possession, harboring, or feeding of wild animals, but we are adding attracting wild animals to cover a broader scope. And then we are going so far as to define further what it means to attract wild animals. And you can see that definition highlighted on this slide. We are going on to further define a term, quote unquote, damage as it relates to property. Again, just to provide further analysis and focus on these particular elements of the prohibited activities, primarily centered around those that would attract these animals into these human and wild animal interactions. And then finally, I can point to section 11 of this broader section, subsection 11, I should say, to note that although it's not highlighted, we have added in a couple of places where city staff, as appropriate, not just wildlife, our animal resource officers, have the authority to respond to these. This is solely to add efficiency to the process so that city staff can address these issues as quickly and as collaboratively as possible. Those amount to all the changes that we're making. You can see that language that's been highlighted. The penalties for these remain a civil penalty. They escalate with increasing iterations of violations, but the total amounts of those penalties have not changed. There are no criminal penalties associated with this, and perhaps most importantly, I can say that you are allowed to keep your bird feeders so long as those bird feeders do not become specific attractants to bears. So I know certain people are concerned about that. But with that, I know James would join me in saying that we'd be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Our request of this committee is that you would approve for the consideration of the full city council the proposed update to our wildlife feeding ordinance. And with that, I'll close and open the floor for your questions.
I appreciate the detailed overview, James. A lot of that resonates. You know, I think that having it put out there and seeing the data just kind of confirms and gives that backup of this trend we're seeing. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness of, you know, some folks have just lived with bears forever, and so they kind of know it. And we just need all of our neighbors to gain that information too, so that we can keep ourselves and bears safe. I don't have any specific questions of the presentation. I don't know if you do, Sandra. I will say that I don't know that maybe I missed it, but the language change I didn't see ahead of this call. And I think like many humans, I'm not able to read, listen, think strategically in order to approve like in 2 seconds. So it's hard for me to, like, I didn't even get to really read that language. So, I mean, we still have 12 minutes. If you want to put the slide up and give us a couple minutes to just sit quietly with it, we could probably pursue giving a thumbs up today. But in the future, if there's really text changes, I need to see that ahead of time. I can't really, I won't give you my best self if I'm having to do that on the fly, but I'm willing to do that today. You want to give us a couple minutes.
Madam Chair, that makes total sense. And I would refer the committee to the staff report. It does include the proposed resolution, which is the updated ordinance, and in red is the changes of the text. There aren't many of these.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that thorough on that one today. I apologize.
Not at all. And I can go ahead and very quickly highlight again. There's only 2 sections of the ordinance which are changing, and I can point you to those very quickly. All of this is contained in Chapter 3 of our Code of Ordinances, Article 1, Section 3. All of this is our wildlife feeding ordinance, and I will first direct everyone's attention to subsection 3.7. In 3.7, A9, and I know I'm being specific, but this is where this is. We have added the following language, giving the wildlife resource officer authority to, and they already had this, the majority of this, to issue orders or warnings in their sole discretion regarding the presence of bears or other wild animals in the area, and directing residents in the area to remove secure attractants within 14 days. The real change here is we went from 60 days to 14 days. So it's just quickening the pace with which anyone has to correct a violation. Now, we've added subparts 1 and 2 there, but those already existed. We did that only to highlight that this is important here. So a failure to comply does expose you to a civil penalty. That was already the case, but we wanted to add this language just to make sure it's very clear, and that the provision may be enforced within the corporate boundaries of the city of Asheville. That wasn't included with specificity, but all of our ordinances are already only generally applicable within the city limits. So those are the only changes to that first section. If we move on down to section 3.9, and this is all within 3.9A, the changes that we made are first to subsection 6. All of this was already prohibited, the keeping, possession, harboring, feeding of wild animals, but we added the word attracting. So this is only the first one additional word there, adding attracting animals or wild animals would be a prohibited activity. And then we further added some definitionary language. So we've added in there what it means to attract, and you can see that highlighted there. So it's not limited to, but including the attracting the presence of bears or wild animals that creates a danger to humans, wildlife, or domestic animals, or causes danger to other properties. So that definitionary language was not previously there, but we thought this is really what we're trying to focus on, so we want to include that. And then the second highlighted area just defines what it means to be a danger. So this again shall come with the potential for human injury or death, the potential for increased risk or disease transmission between the animal and humans, or increased potential for death and injury to the bears, livestock, or other companion animals. Those are essentially all of the changes that we've made. The only other tweak we've made in a couple of little places is all of this used to be completely at the responsibility and purview of the wildlife resource officer. But in cases where perhaps they aren't available or there's some other responding agency, we've given the authority for city staff in general to issue these orders or to enforce it per the terms of the ordinance. That it represents the entirety of the updates that we've made. Again, we already had an ordinance in place, so we're lucky we're only tweaking and not recreating, but those are the changes that we would suggest.
Thanks again. Appreciate that. And apologies for needing that extra review. Sandra, anything on your mind? Okay. I make a motion to move this forward to City Council.
Okay. And Sandra.
All right. I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Ullman. Aye. The motion passes and moves forward to full council. All right. James, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your overview. And Mr. McVeigh, thanks for the work that you're doing for us and for keeping us on your team as we do this better. Thank you. Our last item on the agenda is public comment. We didn't have any at the beginning of the call. Not sure if there's any now.
No, we do not.
All right. With that, I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right. Sandra made a motion. I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore, to you. Yes. So we are close. Awesome. Okay. Anything else, staff, or is that gets us to where we're going? Thank you so much. We're off to a great start. Looking forward to more work together. Take care. Bye-bye.